this place again, where D&I is now, again, a hot topic. If any of you have spent any time on social media or LinkedIn, you probably could throw a stone and hit a new company starting a diversity and inclusion office and creating a CDO role. So I think organizations are now recognizing that if they did not have someone in that role that was caring for D&I, that they needed to do that, considering all of the unrest and the global unrest, to be clear, that's going on around the world, just around different concepts and different aspects of D&I. And so I would say this is yet another turn in which D&I has become a buzzword, and that companies have now dedicated more money and resources and commitment, to be clear, to change the way that they operate internally, and also how they serve their clients and their employees. And so I think it is getting a much brighter spotlight on it currently. And I think with every turn, we push the needle a little bit more, we make a little bit more progress, but Ron is absolutely right. We still have a lot to do and a lot of work to do, which I know Ron and I will be engaged in for the foreseeable future.
No, absolutely.
Let me start a little bit of trouble myself then. I'm going to read something, and then I want to get both of your feedback on it. It's called The Prioritization of D&I. In an article by Sarah Todd from Courts and Courts at Work on August 10th in 2020, she wrote, far more white men thought that DEI was at least somewhat important, 48%, and 42% thought it was very important. Yet even in the latter group, dubbed the true believers by the research, only 56% said they were actively supporting DEI at their jobs. The most common reason both groups gave for not being involved: I'm too busy. How does your role impact existing business structures, which may reinforce discrimination like racism, sexism, homophobia, etc.? And I'll put that article in the chat so people can read it at their leisure.
Yeah, it was a great article, Latoya. And it's just interesting because I don't know about Ron, but I was not surprised at this at all, because if you think about it, even within HR functions where D&I really existed and lived, it was never historically a full-time job for someone. It was always a small percentage of someone's role. And though many leaders, especially business leaders, are really focusing on delivering results, driving revenue, creating growth for the organization, D&I, while they may feel it's important, was never something that they were personally accountable for. And so as Ron and I sit in these roles where we have purview over much of the internal functions and processes in the organization, that we can actually, start to look at the ways in which we not only manage processes, but the ways in which we behave and how we treat each other. And so because it's a full-time role for myself, it makes it easy for me to dedicate the time and effort that needs to go into ensuring that you have an opportunity to dismantle the processes and the policies that potentially protect systems of bias and discrimination and potentially systemic racism in our organization.
Yeah. So in addition to being a part-time role, I think the other thing is, the value has never really been seen by leaders. So when they're saying they're too busy, what I hear is that they're not really looking to add value to the company. Because if they were, they would recognize that D&I is a value add and not just a nice to or something that should be happening over there with the resource groups or something like that. So some of my early experiences with that, just that explicit language around, well, look, we're running a business here. We're catering to our clients. We don't have time for this. Some of my early conversations with that accounting firm with KPMG, with those partners, was getting them to see the value. And those were really hard conversations back in the day. Just imagine the firecracker coming in New York City. I'm going to take it by the world, by the horns, and really challenging them. I did a presentation once where I put up a blank screen. This is for the partners. I put up a black screen and I asked the partners what that screen represented. And they were just kind of like, there's nothing there. And I said, absolutely right. That's your diversity. And so always caused, but really, I think the turning point in those conversations was when they did see the value of the diversity and inclusion. And that was, I mean, we are in business to make money. I don't know, unless you're not for profit, but most financial service firms are in the business to drive profit, drive margin, deliver to their shareholders. The best ways to do that aren't necessarily the ways that you've always been doing it. So if you look at DE&I, you look at diverse talent, you look at diverse ways of thinking, even, or socioeconomic. Azuree, you talked about like some of the things below that sort of waterline in terms of, socialization, socioeconomic background, different schools, different approaches, and being able to bring all of that to the table to then, it is a good thing and it's the right thing, but it also is going to help you make money. Mm-hmm. And there should be no shame in that. If you're in financial services and you're in the business of making money, I want to help you do that. I'm not here to, this isn't a cost center. This isn't a, an expense, they'll go start some diversity work. It really is, truly should be tied to the business. And I am not shameful about making sure that that tie is there and then leveraging it.
And I'm sorry, just really quickly, just to piggyback on what you said, Ron, what was interesting, and I don't know if you feel this way as well, is I think now there is so much research that substantiates the business case for diversity and how there's increased productivity, there's increased creativity, increased innovation, which all has direct impact on the bottom line. And so I think, I think there will never be a place when we won't have to at least mention what that business case is and allude to it and talk about it and highlight before we go into what we want. But I almost feel that, at least in the rooms I've been in, that there is a little bit more comfort. There's less convincing that I have to do that there it is about competitive advantage in business. But, there's still pockets. So we do what we have to do.
No, definitely. I mean, and I'm going to stay there for a sec, LJ, if I can. You think about any like complicated or complex business problem that we've faced in the last 20, 30 years. You put some of the smartest minds to it and we figured it out. For some reason, we can't get this diversity and inclusion thing right, and it's the business cases there, S&P, you're doing better, you're making more money. Okay, well, let's do that. I've done a lot of work around unconscious bias over the last really 20 years. And a lot of folks felt like, okay, well, I understand it. I get the concept. We're all biased, blah, 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 blah. So what? I think we haven't done the work to really help mitigate some of that bias. So, as you say, we don't have to make that business case as much because I think we are chipping away at some of those biases that have kind of hindered us from getting any real traction in the space.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry, LaToya, I don't want to hijack. I know you're getting.
Go ahead. This is the point of a conversation. If we were in real life.
There's a burning just comment that I really quickly want to make, and that is, I was just attending a workshop not too long ago, and one of the research outcomes was that there's a significant perception gap. There's a perception gap in the experiences of people of color, of women, within society, within broader organizations, that also has hindered us in the ways that you're talking about. There's definitely a perception gap in how we view our abilities to advance, our abilities to participate in a traditional meritocracy, if you will. And so, I just had to mention that because I think when I heard it, I said, that's very interesting. I saw the data, which was even more compelling, that there's a perception gap about what is actually happening here.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Thank you. No, I think that perception gap is such a, so a lot of the work that I do within our employee resource groups is around self-advocating and just being able to kind of see yourself in that role, doing things unapologetically and not just feeling like, I'm just grateful that I have a job. Let me just sit back, be quiet, because if I make too much noise, then, I'm out the door and somebody else is going to come in. I feel like we're at a time right now where that can't be our approach anymore. I think we have to just, kind of go for it, swing for the fences, not apologize, not feel gratitude just because you got the job. And well, yeah, I did find out that I'm making $50,000 less than my colleague, my white male colleague, but you know what, that's okay. I'm just gonna grin and bear it because I'm just happy to be here. I think those days are over. I think a lot of the old rules are falling apart and falling away. You mentioned Breonna Taylor, you mentioned George Floyd. I continually do this in conversations that I lead where folks say the incident or, the circumstance. I'm like, no, those were murders. Let's talk about it. Those were people. Those weren't. So, I think driving different conversations, race, religion, politics, compensation, all of those things that before you couldn't talk about, I think we need to be talking about today.
Yeah, so I'm going to have to stay on this one just for one more second only because, there's a conversation about speaking up, but many organizations have punitive policies around advocating for yourself. So in the event that you notice that you are being paid less for the same work, then what? The organization has an HR team designed usually to protect protect the company. So in these spaces, people feel conflicted, and in that moment, they are just happy to have a job because there is someone that would take $50,000 less to do the same work. So it's like a double-edged sword. That's not one of the questions on my list, but what are your thoughts on that?
Sure. Oh, Azuree.
No, this is like the proverbial, question. It's how much are you willing to risk to move things forward? And I think to be honest with you, I think it's a very personal question. I think there are a few of us who feel comfortable that they've built enough wealth of credibility and goodwill that they feel that they can be more vocal within an organization to stand up. Now, mind you, unfortunately, it's a bit of sociology. Just to harken back a little bit to my degree, I still go back to just behavior and just conditioning. If you have learned that when you speak up and you stand up and you call things out, and then all what you see as the outcome is retaliation, termination, or things that are more subtle, where life is made more difficult for you until you are pushed out of the door, right? So it's a learned behavior where you learn that if you do this, you're going to suffer these repercussions. And to your point, people have lives, they have families, they need to provide. And so I think for a very long time, there was a level of, I'm just going to put my head down and keep going. But I think it's interesting. I think one of the things I've seen, particularly within COVID and then with the killings of George, Ahmaud, and Breonna, I think there's a level of moral justice that now is a part of the conversation that may not have been there before. And I think there is something inherently in people, in humans, that I think it's no longer going to be comfortable to let these things go. I don't want to diminish the courage that it takes to stand up for what you believe and find your voice. But I think now if there was ever a time to do that, and ever a time to feel comfortable to talk about your experience and what you've seen and what you think is not right, I think now is the time. I don't know what your perspective on that, Ron.
200% in agreement. I think, you say it's personal. Everybody has their own line in the sand, and that line in the sand gets crossed and it's like it's done. I know for me, and I've been fortunate because 2-income household, so I've had a little bit more flexibility, but I do try and sort of put myself in those shoes. What price is your health worth? What price is your peace of mind worth? For me, if I got to a place where I was like, I wasn't feeling respected, wasn't feeling valued, wasn't, getting the things that I needed, I'd leave. I don't know if, and right now, like you say, you go on LinkedIn, there's like a gazillion different diversity jobs. I'm like, oh yeah, I could go anywhere. And I really challenge the places that I go to because I don't want to go in and feel like I have to be, hey, thank you for hiring me. Thank you for giving me this job. I'll just sit over here until you need me. I'm not going to be that person anymore. And, I think I'd rather be out on the street than to just kind of let myself be undervalued. And, to Azuree's point, that line in the sand for a lot of people has shifted. It was, we could have our personal lives out here and we could have our police stops and, worrying about our teenage kids or whatever. And then we cross the threshold into our workspace and we'd just be like, buttoned up. Nope, nothing, everything's fine. Nope, I'm good. I think that line has really shifted for a lot of people. And we're not able to kind of keep those two worlds separate anymore. And so that moral kind of obligation of corporations right now to recognize that and address that is super important. And I think we have to take advantage of it.
So I have like 5 more questions, but I have to stay here for one more because I need to know one more thing.
Let's do it.
See, most of those statements that you've made, I feel like you've spoken from the perspective of what you observed as a person of color. But what about the allies that are witnessing these things and know that there's some egregious? When you're looking at these forums and you see that they've hired John over Bob and, well, you know, Jamal over John, and you see, I have to make a clear distinction, but you see that they're equally qualified, if not one more than the other, and the person is in the decision-making role, or the person is an ally, well, calls themselves an ally, wants to be an ally, truly believes in their heart that they want to act and do something, but obviously not put their livelihood at risk. What is the conversation for them? Like, what should happen? Because I feel like there's no roadmap for this. There's no narrative around how can I show up for someone else when I know this is wrong, without getting everybody fired, blowing everything out of the work, getting myself fired, whatever.
Yeah. Safety. Yeah. So I've been, so even going back to the Fed, because I was still with the Fed after the George Floyd murder, and we were doing diversity dialogues. So we were just inviting people to come on and share their stories. And it was powerful. We had grown men crying. We had women that were just angry, all the things that you're not supposed to do in a corporate setting. A lot of the phone calls and follow-up that I would get would be from those white male leaders who had never really kind of paid any attention to any of this. And they were calling to say, hey, look, my whole team is white. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. What can I do different? And I think we really got to their hearts and minds a little bit. And so it you know, kind of, again, their line in the sand shifted as well. And they were really, truly, so there's performative allyship, and then there's, you know, authentic allyship. And I could kind of see and tell the difference. And I think some of those conversations I've had, and I've done these with Mizuho as well, were same outcome. White male leaders calling and saying, I need to do something different. I think we have to take advantage of that. And, you know, we're not going to get everybody. There are some folks who are so dug down in the sand, you know, those kids when they bury themselves in the sand and all you can see is their heads. That we're not going to get everybody, but if we get 1, we get 2, we get 10, we just keep chipping away.
Okay, and so there's one other question, because, you know, DE&I, we've spoken a lot about race and just gender, but what is the role of DE&I as it relates to employees with disabilities and those that need additional accommodations? Like, what is the role of the DE&I team or DEI in this space?
It's interesting because as far as I've always been in DE&I, people with disabilities have been a group of underrepresented people. They are no different than anyone from religion, national origin. They're a protected class by the government because they also have been prevented over time from really realizing their fullest potential and being able to have the same access and opportunities in the workplace. And I have been a part of it, and I was very proud. Citigroup had a very robust accommodations program for whatever disability. It could be mental, cognitive, physical, verbal, and the organization made pathways and made channels to ensure that if you were capable and you could do the job, that they would accommodate you to ensure that you could do that. So as far as I'm concerned, diversity has always included, you know, people with disabilities, and it behooves organizations, and again, going back to Ron's earlier point, it behooves organizations to ensure that they have employees from every walk of life, every background, every disability. Everyone has something to contribute, and organizations are beholden, you know, aside from, you know, just the fact that it's the right thing to do, it's the business thing to do. But it's something that they have to absolutely care for.
Thank you for that. Go ahead,
I
Ron.
would say a lot of diversity efforts started around identity diversity, around gender, around race. But I think the broader conversation around inclusion is everybody. And it also brings the white male back to the table for that conversation. So if you're looking to design systems or processes that are inclusive, then whether you're differently abled, whether you're white male, whether you're, you know, whatever it is, those systems should be built to support who you are. And that's, I think, the important shift. So yeah, a lot of folks, you say, what's diversity? Oh, it's black and white. But it really isn't. Diversity is so much more. And, and it's the systems that you design to really support that so much more that's really going to make the difference.
Right. And it's so interesting. And just to stay here just for a little while longer, Latoya, if you'll indulge me, is that when I think about my most recent role at Fitch Ratings, one of the first things that we talked about with our D&I steering group was ensure that they understood that D&I was about all of us. And more importantly, it was everyone's responsibility. As I was the first one to be hired to care for D&I in a full-time role with that organization, it was important for them to understand that while I'm there to bring expertise, while I'm there to support and build programs and help get them on the right path to really build a sustainable strategy, it was important that it wasn't only my personal responsibility. It didn't only sit with HR, and it wasn't only with people who are passionate in our employee base. It was about every business leader, every person had to own the outcomes for D&I because it broadly and ultimately impacted the culture of the organization. And so I think it's always so important for people to understand that D&I is about everyone. It's about all of us, and it's all of our responsibilities. And in order for us to move forward and progress on all of these dimensions, and then maybe Ron and I will be out of a job, and that'll be great. And if you don't need people like us to sit in these roles and care for this. But I think, it's important for us to ensure that there are channels and that we are looking at these processes and these procedures and ensuring that everyone has access and everyone sees themselves in D&I. And I know Ron mentioned a lot about, white men and really them being the mainstream, and how do we ensure that they themselves see themselves in D&I and see their part that they play in it, because that inevitably makes the difference.
Absolutely. Okay, so then that kind of is a good segue into the next question I have, which is, how does D&I impact the path to promotion and the concept of talent development? What are you seeing as a gap for career advancement? Like, I do executive coaching and I help people reach their fullest potential, and I train them on soft skills. That's my thing, because I noticed in technology that that's a major struggle for people that are seeking the path to promotion. You've sat down, you put your head down, you do all your work, you're excellent, you deliver on time, on budget, you're doing exceptional work, but you're never considered for promotion. What are you seeing as some of the gaps in the work that you're doing to change that?
So, and Latoya knows this because in my former life at Citigroup, I had a hybrid role where I cared for what I would call traditional talent management activities, performance management, leadership competencies, succession planning, to a lesser extent, L&D. And then I had D&I as a combined role. And what I always share with people that I coach and that I mentor is that the path for promotion starts much earlier than the actual process for promotion. It starts the day you are onboarded, because it starts to ask questions about how you're acclimated to a team. What projects are you given? What impact does your work have on the organization? Do you see yourself in leadership roles? And so that's at the very beginning when you start a role. And then if you translate that forward, then when you start looking at performance management and how are you being rated? Are you being calibrated for the same level of work and output against your peers? Are you getting a performance rating that is accurately reflective of the value that you bring? Because if you know anything about promotions, it is those that are high performers that are considered for promotions. And then once you move there, if you're being considered for promotion, then when you get to the process, then you have to ask the question, or rather I can say that I've been in rooms where people have said, well, I don't know if this person is a fit, and I don't know if they have the right executive presence or the gravitas to take the role, but do they have the relationships? And then all of a sudden you're at this end of this process, and these are questions that in theory could have been answered entirely along the way. So the outcomes that we're seeing, not seeing diverse senior leadership, has started much, much earlier in the pipeline, even at the beginning for acquisition. And so I think a lot of the gaps that we're seeing in advancement today are historical in some ways, in terms of how we've had people move through these processes and who has been positioned in the best way to then be promoted continually over time, because there is a level of momentum that comes with that. And so for me, I always think about promotion as a day one question. And you as an advocate for yourself have to manage your career and your roles and your positions with that mindset to ensure 3 to 5 years down the line, when you're ready for the promotion, you have done all of the things to get you there over time.
Okay,
LJ, we have a few questions. I don't know if you want to jump into those yet.
Okay, I'm ready. Well, I have 2 more questions that I need to ask, but we will defer over to the questions from the audience, and we'll take a break from my line of questioning, which is on this very long piece of paper, and move to the audience. So Maureen, if you could field the questions.
Sure. So someone has written and said, "Hi, Ron, you hit the nail on the head. In financial services, it's about the bottom line. How do you get the commitment you speak about from leadership, or at least know you have it from them? It's all caps, not only about the check."
There's some convincing. So, I don't know, Azuree, I don't have command and control in my role. I have influence. And so when I'm talking to leaders and I'm getting to I spend a lot of time just building up that trust relationship. And when you do that, a lot of times you'll find out the things that are, kind of holding them back from being truly committed. And so there's a lot of influence that goes into my conversations with leaders, a lot of credibility building, a lot of, just getting them to a place where they're comfortable being uncomfortable, talking about what it is that's keeping them from moving this forward. Their commitment can't just be a check. Check is nice, but it's not enough. They really truly have to, and I know everybody's seen it. You've seen a leader get up and read a statement about diversity and inclusion, and they read it really well sometimes. And you can tell that there is absolutely zero sincerity behind that like somebody else wrote it and they're just trying to read it and get off of that stage as quickly as possible. I don't know if all leaders can get to that place, but I do know that that's where I try and get them, to the place where they're comfortable, where they're feeling confident in the conversations. I'll share one quick story. I was prepping a senior leader of white male for a Black History Month event. There were about 350 people down in the room. We're up in his office. And as we're getting ready, he turned and he said, I don't know the difference between African American and Black. And to me, that was not that big a deal. But to me, it was a big deal because it showed that he really, truly trusted me to guide him into that conversation. So we had the explanation. He went down, he delivered a phenomenal, presentation. I think getting to that trust with leaders, getting leaders to see the vision, getting leaders to see the connection with the business so that they're not saying they're too busy to do this, but really seeing a true connection between what we're driving and what they're driving is critical. So I think that that's one of the strategies that I put in play.
I would just add to that question to ask, what do you do if you work at an organization where there is no semblance of a diversity and inclusion team or interest in building that in? Is there a way that you could advise someone who's just an employee? How would you approach administration to say, maybe this is something they should look into or invest in?
Azuree, I'm going to give you that because I got like a smarty pants answer for that one.
Right. I don't have a very good answer for that either, except to say that in every organization that I have been a part of, the employees have led the leadership, and they have been very vocal in terms of what they're seeing and what they would like to see, right? And so, for employees that there is no D&I function, they only have HR business partners, I would work your way up the chain. If you have a good relationship with your manager or another leader, I would start having conversations and saying, hey, I've noticed that we don't have, or I noticed that I don't have access to, and just talk about observations and things that you have observed and seen and what could be helpful, and start having those conversations with your managers, with your HR business partner, and work your way up through the organization. I think it's interesting when I think about my time at Citigroup. We started our employee network program now close to, a little over 20 plus years ago. And it really was employee-led and employee-initiated discussions about the change that they wanted to see in organizations. I think what is also helpful is that if you find employees that are like-minded like you, who have also observed the same things and want to see things differently, then you all get together and start talking about your experiences, start thinking about the differences you'd want to see, and then surface all of that feedback up through the organization. You know, even if there are organizations that don't have employee engagement surveys, that don't request feedback from employees, I think it behooves all of us to communicate that feedback in the best channels that we have available to us, so that they would become aware of what's going on. And just to add another thing, and employees know this, they know inauthenticity. We know when we've seen people speak inauthentically. And, you know, you have to meet people where they are. I've always stepped into roles talking with leaders, asking about organizational readiness, asking about leadership readiness. And at the end of the day, you have to meet people where they are and bring them along on the journey. Give them the resources, give them the tools, give them the articles to read, the books to read, the movies to watch. Expand their knowledge of what they know to be true, and create a little cognitive dissonance for them about what they believe to be true and what you have seen, and really start the dialogue there.
Another question is protective class of judgment. Strong statement. Is this a position we can push for Black Lives Matter?
I'm sorry, say it again. Protected class of
judgment. I'm not sure who had, maybe it's a quote if someone had said that. Protective class of judgment. ... Strong statement. Is this a position that we can push for Black Lives Matter?
I think that statement came shortly after we were talking about employees with disabilities. And I think, Azuree, you had mentioned protective class as a...
Yeah, from a governmental perspective. So, you know, just legally, you know, there are laws in the books that prevent discrimination and bias, and it requires organizations to make a good faith effort to hire diverse employees. And so, you know, when you think about Black Lives Matter, I think about Black Lives Matter a lot around advocacy and potentially creating broader, what I would say, even broader impacts. And so while for Black Lives Matter, it is Black people in the United States are a part of a protected class. And that's something that, you know, from a governmental regulations perspective, that exists. And so I think that's the platform that they're working under. What they're saying is that the laws of the land that were meant to protect these classes are not being protected, hence why they exist. And that is why they are trying to move the conversation forward and advocate for much better treatment for Black people in the US and around the world, to be fair.
Okay, another one is, how is progress success measured? How does it compare in the midterm versus long term?
So I guess for me, progress and success is, you know, I've small wins. You know, that conversation 15 years ago with that partner where he, you know, confided in me that he didn't know and showed that trust, credibility. I'm always celebrating my small wins, whether it's, you know, a diversity dialogue where I do get that call from that white male leader who you can tell really wants to do something different. To me, that's a win. You know, I taught college level accounting up in the Bronx for a couple of years. So, you know, a small win for me is the student who calls me and just got promoted to senior associate at the firm I used to work at. You know, just kind of shoots me a note. That's progress. I think if you get leaders, you know, again, it's an influence. If you can get that balance for the leaders to stop, you know, focusing on money here or profits here, diversity here, and really trying to bring those two worlds together, to me, that's progress and success. And longer term, you know, Azuree kind of hit on it. I've said for 20 years that I don't want to have this job. Matter of fact, when I got into the space 20 years ago, if you had told me then that I'd still be doing this and having these same conversations in a lot of ways, I would have laughed at you, because I said, this isn't rocket science, you know. But I guess I underestimated the stubbornness of unconscious bias and some of the things that have really hindered perception gaps and things like that have really hindered us in making progress. But we are making progress, and I think we have to stay positive, but we have to stay bold, and we have to stay unapologetic in our push and the questions that we ask and the things that we do. And again, for me, there's and I've done well, so I'm not going to sit and say it hasn't gone well for me, but there is a line in the sand to this day, and I'm not going to support a leadership team that I don't think is truly committed to this for the right reasons. I just won't do it. So yeah, I just went all over the place with that, but yeah, progress, slow, small wins. Don't just look for the big, silver bullet, because there's no silver bullet. There's no Men in Black, that little, switch that you can switch and everybody's going to be fixed. But, we measure promotions. We can do some of the, sort of tangible sort of success measures. If we look at promotion pools and we look at gender and ethnicity and some of the other, categories, to see, are we being promoted at the same, is attrition. We can look at that. Okay, so we've decreased the amount of attrition for diverse and gender. That could be a success measure. So there are those traditional measures, but I think we have to look for every win that we can get.
It's interesting because I've always told my organizations that, that metrics matter. And in order for us to understand where we're going, we have to first set the right goals based on where we are. And there's no way for you to effectively understand as an organization where you are if you're not looking at the data. And I think I've had the privilege in a lot of ways of working for companies that were very data driven, that understood that metrics and what you measure is what you make progress against, and what you hold people accountable for on those same metrics is how you make progress. And so it's interesting because I think that, as Ron mentioned, there are tons of metrics you can use to track progress over time. But I think the tracking of the progress is not going to, in and of itself, cause the progress. In the beginning, it may shame an organization to be honest about where they are, and make it very clear that there's a burning platform for this work to get done, right? But inevitably, it is the work and the changing of processes, the changing of programs, or the addition of programs that really will inevitably start moving the needle on those metrics that you're choosing to monitor.
Yes.
Okay, so I have 2 questions left. Who else? Was this, Maureen, is there another one?
I was going to have one more, but go ahead. You can jump in.
Well, no, go ahead.
So Ron mentioned at one point something about, that business leader at that company and just being in a spot to explain, the difference between Black and African American. So I guess my question is, with all these DEI or diversity inclusion positions popping up, there seems to be a lot of nuances to the role. It sounds like things still pop up on a day-to-day. I have seen, for example, I mean, it's not commonplace, but I have seen white males in a position of being head of diversity and inclusion. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? I would imagine, you have to be a diverse candidate to hold this role because it comes with a lot of weight. And can this position be held by a white male?
Short answer, yes. I'll let Azuree give a longer answer, but I've actually worked in this industry under a white male who was heading up. He was LGBTQ, and I don't know if that made a difference, but I did think, and that's a question that was about 10 years ago, and it was always something I've asked. But some of my best advocates in this space, allies in this space, proactive, moving forward, have been some of those white males that have been converted into understanding the importance of this. So my answer is yes, but it has to be the right, that's an interesting one. It can't just be a rotation in from one of the business groups because you didn't have anything else to do.
Right.
That doesn't work. It needs to be the right person. And you can, again, this isn't rocket science.
Right. Well, qualified. Yeah.
No, go ahead, Toya.
No, qualified. That would be the word. The right person.
And also,
yeah.
That part.
Crazy, right?
I think anyone who has the support of leadership, who has the budget and the resources to actually make change, if pathways are being made for them to understand, I think they can get the work done. But I think most importantly, there has to be a level of understanding of the various experiences of diverse people, the people who have actually been marginalized within organizations. And I think as long as whoever sits in that seat has an understanding and a care and a passion and a desire to move the needle and move the change, you know, I think that's the most important. And who knows, depending on the organization, having a white man running D&I could make it more successful because he has access,
Absolutely.
he has the level of influence, he has the power to make the changes that we all know should transpire.
Okay, so we are only at 3 minutes left. There are 3 things I want to remind people. You can connect with Azuree, Ron, and myself on LinkedIn. That is the best way to reach us. That's one. Then I have 2 questions, which will end the series. One, and you can answer, each of you can answer it together. I mean, you know, the question together. How can we all take action to support D&I leaders like yourselves in this space? You know, in our roles, wherever we're at, how can we support your efforts? That's one. And then what do you hope your legacy to be in this space? What legacy would you like to leave? So that's how we'll end this conversation.
Perfect. Yeah. So,
No,
I was going to say,
okay.
yeah, for the first question, you know, in terms of support, ask questions, challenge me. I love being challenged on all sides. You know, as a leader, I want somebody to question, you know, well, why are we doing this or why are we not doing this? I love the engagement that I have with my white colleagues around topics like Black Lives Matter or the murders. Just this week, I had a great conversation with a white male who did not get any of this because he said affirmative action was bull because he came from you know, he was adopted and he came from like this very humble, like sort of socioeconomic, and why shouldn't that be the factor and not like color? And so we got into a great conversation. I mentioned the George Floyd murder. He said, aha, but he hasn't been tried yet and he hasn't been this. I was like, he was judge, jury, and executioner. So that kind of like conversation, not always going to be comfortable, not always going to be in agreement, really helps me to understand the fuller picture of what it is that I'm trying to get done. So I might think I have a platform and, you know, maybe the majority is, you know, thinking the same way I am. I have to always recognize that there are people who don't necessarily think the way I do, or maybe don't support, you know, and I said put politics, race, religion, all of that is on the table now. You can call me and we can talk about any of that. And I have to make sure that I'm providing that platform for those opposing views and opinions. And so challenge. Don't like what I say, don't like where I stand, that's fine. Let's have that conversation. Let's be uncomfortable. Let's agree to disagree and help me do my job better. So that's really what I think helps me.
I would just quickly add on that. I know this is a lightning round. Feedback and dialogue. I need to hear about. I need to hear about your experiences as employees, as leaders, to really make it better for everyone. I need to know what's happening on the ground if I don't know. And everyone's experience is unique and different. And in order for me in my role to create interventions and to change things for the better, I need to know what's going on. So be honest with me, reach out to me, tell me what's going on. As an individual person, if you, it's kind of like if you see something, say something. Help me clear the barriers, help me go over the obstacles, help me hold your leaders accountable. Because if I'm pushing and you're pushing, then we're going to see change. And then lastly, when I think about my legacy, I think about, I hear my HR colleagues, my fellow D&I colleagues not being able to create what they consider to be sustainable, permanent change. And my legacy, I would hope to somehow create a blueprint, a methodology, a framework that would almost guarantee results for our colleagues who are really passionate and want to see change and just don't have the right tools and resources to get it done.
Okay, anything else, Ron?
Just really quick on the legacy. I want to talk myself out of this job. Azuree mentioned that, and I want to play golf every single day.
Yes, and that is how we end, because that is everyone's dream, to play golf every single day. Thank you for joining. Stay tuned for our next session, and that's how we end. Thank you, Maureen, and thank you, Michelle.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you all.
Azuree,
Thank you, LJ.
LJ.
Thanks
Have a
all.
good night.